Hi English 219, I hope everything's going well in the course. It's going to be pretty customary for me to make videos of this type to keep you in the loop with what's going on in class and to hopefully clarify some of the concepts and techniques and approaches that we're using to complete our work. So to this point, you've primarily been writing a series of letters, and those letters are helping us practice reader-centered writing, and so each of them has challenged you to write in a different type of way, perhaps with a different voice, with a different purpose. So with the complaint letter, we're really trying to just manage a positive relationship with our reader, and we're trying to get them to sort of acquiesce to our request, which is for a new set of tires or a replacement or a gift card or whatever it is that we're asking for. And we're trying to do it in a very straightforward, concise, professional way. And basically we're using that letter as an opportunity also to learn block letter format and to learn the ins and outs of just letter writing in general. Then we sort of switched our attention to the good and bad newsletter scenarios. And the good newsletter is pretty straightforward, as you learned. We're going to use the direct approach anytime we're reporting good news to folks. And that's really rooted in reader psychology. And so the reality of the situation is, and this is where the you attitude also comes into play, is that when you're writing in a business and professional setting, we need to realize that we're dealing with people who have real psyches and real psychology. And what that means is that we have to anticipate how folks are likely to react to our writing, sort of at a visceral level. So the fundamental truth is that when we're delivering good news, we have nothing to hide, right? We have no reason not to just lead with the bottom line, the one friggin' thing of our communication, which is, yeah, sure, we're going to give you that new set of tires, or absolutely, we'll send you some new tomatoes, or whatever it is. And so that's called the direct approach. But as you've learned in your reading, when it comes to the bad news scenarios, we need to be a little bit more careful. And the reason for that is if we lead with the bad news, for instance, if we led an email or a letter with the word unfortunately, right? And some of you have probably dealt with this when you've applied for jobs, or you've maybe applied to a competitive college in the past, or something like that. Anytime you see that word unfortunately, and especially if it's the first word that you see in the letter, you're likely to tune out. You're not even going to listen to the person's rationale. You're certainly not going to consider their reasoning. And the whole rest of the communication is going to be tainted. So the reality of the situation is, in your bad news scenarios, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to create a pattern of writing where the reader actually hears us out, where they don't see unfortunately or we regret to inform you and tune out the rest. We want them to sort of appreciate and understand where we're coming from and why we're taking the course of action that we are. And so that's why we're going to use the indirect approach. And one way to think about that, and this is for going forward anytime that you're in a situation where you have to do this, one way to think about this is to think hug, kick, hug, right? So we want to lead with a hug. We want to buffer our bad news before we say unfortunately, or I regret to inform you, or we cannot. You want to buffer the bad news in some way. You want to deliver the bad news. You don't want to be apologetic for it, but you want to deliver the bad news. And typically, you want to hold off on saying no until the end of that bad news portion of the letter. You want to express your reasoning, right? So if you're telling somebody that you can't hire them, maybe it's, we had an impressive, unprecedented pool of really qualified applicants. Therefore, we've chosen to go with somebody else or something like that. And then you want to leave with a buffer. You want to leave sort of a positive taste in the reader's mouth anytime you're delivering bad news. Because the reality of the situation is, in business and professional settings, we're trying to maintain goodwill. So we may be writing a bad news email or letter to a vendor or to a customer or to a partner. And the reality of the situation is, those folks are valuable to us. They're assets to us. They are potentially friends of ours, and so we're trying to preserve that goodwill because it goes a long way. So that's really what those three letters were about. It was sort of just dipping our feet in, getting a sense for what this course is sort of going to be about, how it's going to function. Those are not particularly difficult assignments. I'd say of those three assignments, probably the bad news letter is the hardest. It requires the most sort of rhetorical dexterity. You got to think really carefully about your audience and where you're going to put things and how you're going to phrase things. You've got to really massage the language so that you're not too blunt, but that you're also not leaving any sort of wiggle room. It's very clear that you're saying no to this person. And so those three assignments are all good and well. We're moving on. And now we're moving into something a little bit different. And it's my understanding that many of you are in the business marketing program, the accounting program. Many of you have aspirations probably to be entrepreneurs. And so because of that, I think it's important for us to talk about how to market and sell a product. And that's what this sales letter is all about. Now, I'll grant you that writing about your academic program maybe isn't the most exciting thing in the world, but it's a place to start. And it's something that you should have some level of experience with, and that's something that you've lived in and can really speak to and write about. And so I've tried to give you really a lot of different things to think about when it comes to selling things. And those are the things I want to see you trying to implement into your sales letter. They're things like the unique selling proposition, which is so important. And that is trying to think about, how can I differentiate myself on the marketplace? What is it that my product or service does that other products don't do? Sometimes that's going to be price, but other times we're trying to find those really unique things, those niche things that we offer the market that other options don't. So if we're in the business of selling roof shingles, maybe it's that they're the most durable, the longest lasting. Maybe it's they're the most inexpensive. Maybe it's the fact that they're made in Maine. Whatever it is, we're trying to find that thing that we think is going to move the needle with our reader, the thing that we think is going to resonate with them and hopefully hook them in enough so that they're going to capitalize and buy our product or purchase our service. So that's one thing I always want you to be thinking about, and something that I think is really transferable outside of this class. If you're in a situation where you're trying to market or sell a product or service, I want you to ask yourself, what are my unique selling propositions? How am I going to differentiate myself from other options on the market? And so, really, that's a pre-writing exercise. Anytime that you're sitting down to write marketing materials, whether it's a brochure or a radio spot, or if maybe you are writing a letter, or maybe you're updating the content on your website, which we'll be doing later in the semester, I always want you to ask yourself, what are my unique selling propositions? And from that, generally, the other things sort of fall into place. And that looks like the other sort of things that we've been talking about, which are we want to talk about benefits, not features. So when we talk about a product or a service, it's really, especially if we're geeky about it, if it's something we're really passionate about, be the equivalent of me selling fishing lures maybe, we can get really geeky and we can really fixate on features. If we're thinking about a car, we can focus on the horsepower, and we can focus on the type of suspension. Oh, this has McPherson struts or whatever. The reality of the situation is, though, that we're dealing with consumers, not other experts, right? And so what that means to us is that we can't be too geeky about it, and we have to explain to people why those features matter, and that's when we turn features into benefits. Okay, so in your sales letter, the equivalent of that would be to say, you should choose KVCC's business marketing program because it offers really small class sizes. Okay, that's great. And some of these things may seem commonsensical, but we want to connect the dots for our reader and explain what that feature of the program, small class sizes, means on the ground. What is the lived significance of that? What does that matter? And so then we could explain, smaller class sizes mean more interaction with the instructor, more ability to ask questions. And this is really important for those of you who are coming back to school after a long time away, or whatever. Anytime we have the opportunity to connect a feature to a benefit, we want to do that because features are really impersonal, right? And they're not focused on the reader. And we know from reading about the reader-centered approach and reading about the you attitude, in a business setting, we always want to be connecting things back to our reader. We don't want to present things in a vacuum, in sort of like a dehumanized or decontextualized way. We always want to be bringing those things back. So that's super important. And then I've given you two other tools that I think are really important to think about anytime you're crafting a marketing message. One is the AIDA approach, which is attention, interest, desire, and action. And I think that that's just a really nice formula. So one of the things that I think about all the time as a writing instructor is, it's really great. I want you to do well in all the assignments in the class, and I think it's important. I'm trying to create a varied set of experiences that you go through that sort of touch on all of the various audiences and purposes and types of writing that you'll likely be confronted with in a business and professional environment. But the reality of the situation is, I'm really trying to prepare you for when you leave this class, when you're working for a nonprofit, when you're about to create a 30-second radio spot for the local radio market, or when you're about to craft a brochure, or when you're going back in to update your company or business's website. I want you to have a set of tools that allow you to be very systematic in terms of how you craft your message. and thinking about benefits over features, thinking about the U attitude, thinking about the AIDA approach. These things are really going to help you because they're gonna eliminate that initial inertia. They're going to allow you to go, okay, no, I've got this. First, I've got to think about what my unique selling proposition is. Then I've got to think about how can I frame this as a benefit and not just a feature. And then I've really got to think about how I'm going to craft that message relative to getting the reader's attention, building interest, creating desire, and then ultimately helping them take action, because those are the fundamental moves of a marketer in any type of communication. And so then this week, you are thinking about ethos, pathos, and logos, which are classic, college composition, rhetorical studies type terminology. And frankly, I don't really care if you remember the Greek words for it, but I do want you to remember that when we're crafting a message, when we're trying to be persuasive, and all of these things, believe it or not, are going to pay tremendous dividends when we start to write your resume and cover letters. All of these things, ethos, pathos, and logos, are things that we can marshal and things that we can use to our advantage when we're trying to persuade somebody. So ethos is really about the speaker or the writer or the company's credibility. You can sort of think about it as the brand or and it's their authority. And so how can we use that to our advantage? How can we use our identity as the speaker to our advantage? So sometimes we see this in our local market. Folks are always capitalizing on being a Mainer. And so sometimes they'll craft their message in such a way that it's undeniable that this message is coming from a Maine company or from a Maine perspective. The two companies that stand out, especially in central Maine, that do this really well are Hammond Lumber and Martin's. And so they're doing things to leverage their identity, who they are, what they stand for, what their credentials are. They're using that to their advantage as they try to persuade you. And so that's what ethos is really all about, is trying to use your credibility. Sometimes it's the credibility of the information that you have, certainly, right? And sometimes that means that it's backed by science, or that there are studies that prove, or that it's a new technology that's been vetted by certain professionals. And that's all good and well, but sometimes it also comes down to who we are as a company or as an individual, and so that's really important. Pathos is about appealing to people's emotions. Right? And so when we can do that, when we can get people excited, or when, the classic example of this would be folks who sell home defense systems or home security systems. They're always trying to pull at your emotions. They're trying to paint the worst case scenario for you so that you feel compelled, oh my God, yeah, I do need to hire ADT to put in a security system because I can't imagine somebody coming through with a mask and breaking my windows or whatever. And so we can really leverage people's emotions and you'll see that these things are all overlapping and interwoven. That's really, that really looks like the interest and desire part of the AIDA formula. But when we can latch on to people's emotions, maybe make them feel inspired, maybe make them feel comfortable, when we can sort of think about where they're at and what they need to hear, that gives us a real point of leverage when we're trying to persuade them to take some course of action. And that's true in marketing for sure. And then logos is really when we start to appeal to people's sense of reason and their sense of logic. Is sort of how things add up for that person. I think of it as the lens through which people see the world. So a lot of people, their logos or their reasoning is financial, or it could be scientific. Some people have a very scientific frame of mind, but we're really trying to appeal to people's sense of rationality or reason. We're trying to show them why this makes sense, why it's a logical course of action. And so sometimes that can be a really helpful tool for us also. And so that's what ethos, pathos, and logos are really about. And I want to see you try to leverage those in your sales letters, because I think they can be a very valuable tool. And we'll certainly do that also in our cover letters, as I mentioned. So that's really where we're at. So far we've written 4 letters, really short scale types of writing. And you can tell from my feedback on those assignments that I'm really concerned with being concise. So we know from studies that folks in business environments, the number one quality that they look for in writing is conciseness. They want people to maximize their message and minimize their word count. So I'm going to hold you accountable to that, and I'm going to do it sort of progressively over the course of the semester. It's not going to be a deal breaker right now. Right now I'm more focused on your content and your ability to sort of write in a particular genre. But eventually I'm going to be very concerned with it. I'm going to want to see that you are really trying to be economical with your language. And at some point I will share a resource with you about how to maybe think about that. But really it comes down to just being highly critical and scrutinizing your writing and saying, geez, is there a better way to say that? Is there a more direct way to say that? And a lot of times that's just a product of proofreading really carefully. So that's something that's going to be sort of a recurring theme. But really what we're trying to do right now is we're just trying to think really carefully about our audience. We're trying to, again, assume their position, think about who they are, what their expectations are, what their needs are, sort of what's coursing through their mind, what decision are they trying to make, what problem are they trying to solve, and we're going to try to facilitate that as best as we can. And so far we've been doing it within the context of a series of letters. Now eventually what we're going to do is we're going to sort of write in different formats. So eventually we're going to write, as I mentioned, a resume and cover letter, which represents two totally different genres of writing. We're going to write website content, and we're ultimately going to write a proposal. So you've got a lot of different audiences and different modalities and different genres of writing that you're going to be asked to write in. But all of these things, these letters are our fundamentals. They're kind of our palette or our toolkit that we're going to dip in at various levels and in different recipes throughout the semester. So those things are going to be recurring themes. You're going to hear me talk about the reader-centered approach all the time. You're going to hear me talk about benefits, not features. You're going to hear me talk about the you attitude. So these are things that we're going to live with for a while. Ethos, pathos, logos. Those are fundamental frameworks or habits of mind that I want you to develop. And we're going to add to that toolkit as the semester goes on. But these are things that I want you to constantly be thinking about. Because we know that these are the things that good writers think about. Good writers spend a lot of time pre-writing, and they spend a lot of time revising. And they spend probably the least amount of time in the middle actually composing. And so what we're also trying to do in this class is to create these sort of feedback loops where you're drafting things, I'm giving you feedback, you have the opportunity to revise, or you're getting feedback from your peers, and that's going to be a critical part of what we do here, because the other thing that we know from research is that the best writers are simply the best revisers, and that's why I give you the opportunity to revise everything in this class. It's because we know from studying really good, skilled writers that they spend a lot of time in that revising phase, and that's where they're sort of massaging things, moving things around, asking questions about effectiveness, and asking questions about their audience, and asking questions about their organization and their structure, and that's how they land on really good solutions. They do it by being very strategic and very intentional. Good writing is never arbitrary. It's very calculated, it's very intentional, and usually those decisions, those strategic decisions, are predicated on our audience and our purpose. Right? So what are we trying to do, and who are we trying to do it for, who are we trying to do it with? And so those are going to be our touchstones throughout the course. So that's really what I have for you this week in our mini lecture, just sort of a survey of what we've done and where we're going to be going and why these things are important. If you've been keeping up with the reading, all of this is going to be a refresher, but hopefully it gives you some context as to why we're learning the things that we're doing. I want to thank you for the work so far that you've done in the feedback forum. As I said, that's going to be a critical part of this class, and I'll tell you why. Through my work in professional development settings, working with partners throughout the community to improve their writing in the workplace, one of the things that I've learned is that workplace writing is different than academic writing in that a lot of workplace writing doesn't start from scratch. So in other words, the writing that you do in the workplace, a lot of times you are taking an existing document, an existing brochure, an existing website, an existing series of letters, an existing manual, and you are refreshing it, updating it, revising it, making it more effective. So you're not necessarily starting from scratch. And so what that requires of us is a really tuned in eye and methodology for looking at writing and providing feedback. And so I think it's important in this class, not only do we get practice writing from scratch, but we also get practice looking at existing documents and trying to think about how we might improve them. And often in the workplace, you're going to be doing that with writing that you had no hand in, that you inherited. Somebody wrote this policy manual 3 years ago, and you just got hired, and they're asking you to refresh it. Or the website predates you, and now you've got to go in and make sure that it's meeting the reader's needs. And so it's really critical that not only does this class result in you being a better writer, but hopefully you being a better reviewer, because that's real value added to your employers. So when you can look at stuff, especially stuff as central as a website or a brochure or your marketing materials, and you can say, hey, no, I think you'd be better off if you had a better hook. Or no, I think you're focusing too much on features here and not enough on benefits. Or, geez, I think we could leverage our credibility in the market a little bit more than we are, and that's kind of our unique selling proposition. When you can make those really smart types of suggestions, that's when you add value, and that's when you sort of ascend the ladder. That's when you sort of see your career really take off, because that you're really adding to the bottom line of a company. One of the things that we know, and this is what I'll leave you with, is that folks who are judged as being in the top 10% or top 20% of writers, I don't remember the exact statistic, end up making about 3 times more over their lifetime as other people in their field. So if you're judged as being in the top echelon of writers in your field, you are going to make more money. So that's why being a good writer is so important, is because traditionally that means that you are going to be in positions where you are crafting important messages for that business or for that organization. So I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions or comments, please, as always, call, text, email, whatever it takes. But that should give you a sense of where we're at, and I look forward to giving you some feedback on your sales letters. Thanks.